I want to ask you about a number of things. We're here to talk about the new album which just came out from Wet Ink Ensemble. First of all, a lot of people who listen to this program may not be familiar with the work of Wet Ink Ensemble. I wonder if you can give us a little 101, a little history on the group.
Sure. So Wet Ink, we celebrated our 20th anniversary last year. Now, I haven't been in the group for 20 years. I've been in it, only for about 11. But yeah, the group was started in 1998. So I guess that we're coming up on our 22nd season. And it was started at Manhattan School of Music by a number of composers there and performers. So these were composer-performers who were writing their own music and performing their own music. And that's a tradition that we've continued throughout our history. One of the founding members was Alex Minchek, who is on this album. So there's two pieces on the album, one by Alex and one by me. And Alex started this group with other composers. So Sam Hilmer is another one. He's in a group called Z's. And at the time, the group was almost synonymous with this band Z's, which is more of like a rock band. And Wet Ink was more of the composition side of that, although that band very much composes their music. And so then over the past 20 years, we've been making music in New York City and around the country and around the world. We tend to write music for ourselves, but we also commission other people to write music for us. We've worked with George Lewis, with Peter Oblinger. We've done a number of portrait concerts of Peter Oblinger's music, Austrian composer. Beat Furr, Swiss composer, Aaron Gee, many American composers, Ben Hackbarth. So we've worked with all these composers in the United States and from abroad in multiple ways. So we are not only an organization that has composers that write for ourselves, but we're also an organization that commissions other composers or presents music by composers that are not necessarily always presented in the United States.
Yeah, now you mentioned the other composer on this disc, Alex Minchek, who is a sax player, and you were like the tech guru of the group. You are a composer who works in electronics. Now, you were like programming computers before you picked up an instrument, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've been programming computers since I was a teenager, and teenagers, I was just listening to This American Life, and there was an episode about teenagers kind of hanging around. There's so much about being a teenager is just hanging around doing nothing. And so when I would come home from school when I was 12 or 13 years old, I was hanging around doing nothing, and I started poking around at my computer, and I realized that I really liked doing that. And I was writing, I wrote programs for no reason. I would write like games through high school. And then when I got to college, I was a computer science major. But I decided that I didn't actually study music until college. And I had this like real need to do that in my senior year of high school. I don't know why I didn't do that before, but I didn't. And I said to myself, when I get to college, I'm going to take some piano lessons. That was the idea. And I did, and I fell in love. And I just started hanging out in the music building basically 24 hours a day, or at least until the security guard would kick me out and at 1 or 2 in the morning. And just playing music, and I didn't really realize the connection that I could make. I was making music with computers. There was a computer in a room, and my teacher just said, "Hey, you figure it out, right? You go in that room and figure it out." And I did, and I was making music with computers. But after my undergraduate degree, I worked as a programmer, and I started to figure out how to merge these things, how I could program the computer to make music, and that's what I've been doing ever since.
I want to talk a little bit about the process and your process of creating electronic music. Some folks who are listening may be thinking, electronic music, yeah, that's like, EDM or something like that. But
sure,
this is entirely different. Can you give us sort of a primer on what it is that you do?
Well, I wouldn't say it's entirely different. I mean, I teach a lot of lot of students and a lot of students who make EDM. So a lot of my undergraduates, that's what they're doing. And what I've found is if I'm going into I'll have an undergraduate who's making EDM, and then I'll have a doctoral student who's writing a string quartet, and I find myself saying the exact same things to the students. And I think because in the end it's all music and form and shape. And how we deal with time, and so I really think these things are the same thing. That being said, my music doesn't sound like EDM, but it comes from the same place. It comes from a place of trying to create a visceral experience for the listener. So whereas EDM gets its kind of visceral experience through dance. This is really just in sound. I can't imagine people dancing to this music, but it's how to get that like visceral physical feeling into the electronics, and a lot of it is performed. So I've been working on my own instrument for the last 10, 12 years. And it's a very physical instrument. It has lots of controls, and I'm trying to get this like physical feeling into the sound. So I think that's something it actually has in common. And in this piece in particular, there's the middle movement on-off that is all based around just one single like drum sound that you might find in some dance music.
Yeah.
But I treat it kind of in a different way.
Well, let's talk about your contribution to this album. The piece as a whole is called Lines on Black, and it's several different movements. I mean, some of them run into each other. I guess it's meant to be listened to all as a whole, but you focus on the different instruments of the ensemble each at a time, combine them in different ways, and overall it sounds like very intimate music to me. For instance, I noticed in the flute and voice segment that you did, there's a lot of that note C being repeated. I hear C's popping up all the time. I wonder if there's sort of a tonal center to any of this. You know, how much of it is all electronic noises and how much of it is guided by more traditional musicality?
Yeah, so the piece is broken up into multiple movements, and each of the movements focuses on individuals. So if I were to say what I'm doing, I'm trying to focus in on like these particular players, and express what they can express musically most through the composition, so that it makes it almost like allows them to become even more of themselves. So in the opening movement, there's a duo between flute and violin, and this is for Aaron Lesser and Josh Modney, and these are two players who it doesn't matter what I write for them, they can play it. They're astonishing human beings and astonishing musicians. So I wanted to write a piece that had that element of like very strict notation, but also allowed them to almost improvise while playing something that was completely notated. So there's a lot of freedom in the score that allows these players to really, really go for it and express themselves while still like sticking to the music on the page. The next movement is it's a piano solo for Eric Wubbles. Now, this is completely improvised. I did not write anything for Eric. And the reason I did that is because Eric he's one of my favorite composers alive. And he writes these incredibly detailed, intricate scores that basically he plays with other people. And a lot of people not as many people have tried to tackle them as they should have because they're so difficult. But what Eric has been he's been blossoming into this amazing improviser, and I just knew that this was the moment to be like, hey, Eric, you do what you want.
How does that look on the page? Does it just say, go off on your own for a few minutes, or?
Yeah, kind of. Totally. I mean, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
What there is in the music is a framework for him. So he's coming out of the first movement, and so there's like a tonal framework actually around G that he's going to emerge from, and then he improvises freely. And then he has to end and go into C. So you're saying that Kate's movement, the voice and flute movement, is in C, and in fact, the previous movement is also in a C tonality.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you know some theory, the end of the first movement is kind of in a G tonality, and Eric emerges from that, and then we end up in this voice part with this C tonality. So there's in fact a 5/1 progression there, and it's not a coincidence. It's definitely planned out that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if the listener feels that or how they experience it. For me, moving between closely related keys like that is a powerful way in music that is largely noise based to add a kind of pitch center element to it. So after this piano solo, there's a duo between Kate Soper and I, where I play electronics and Kate sings, and we get into some pretty gnarly territory there for voice and electronics. It's really fun stuff.
How do you use the voice? I mean, obviously you're not. Are you using any kind of a text, or is it just sounds?
Well, see, there's another thing. So I've been working on this electronic instrument for all this time, and the movement is also improvised. So there's not a notated part to that movement. The way I think about that is I've made this instrument, and the instrument is the score in a way. The instrument implies a certain kind of sound world or a certain kind of gestural world that the performer is going to inhabit, and we are playing off one another in order to make the music we're making. Now, what I think is super cool is we had played the piece when we recorded it, but we didn't discuss what we were going to do in that recording. And I think when we went into the studio, when we came out of the studio, Kate and I both had not imagined what we were going to do when we went in. And something really special happened. Kate went into this really aggressive, like screaming. We call it the Russian grandmother. She's like screaming with these like guttural sounds that I'd never heard her do before. And I think it was just the moment, and to be able to capture that and put it on a record, I think is super exciting.
Yeah. Well, we should mention Kate Soper, also a formidable composer in her own right.
Oh, she's one of the great composers alive right now. And she writes really incredible music for her voice and other instruments, or just for instruments. I mean, she's just an amazing composer. But she tends to use text in very effective ways to express ideas. Yeah, so the music keeps going there, and it goes into a duo for Kate and Aaron. Now this is notated, and it's basically based around this C, where the voice is actually just singing a C the whole time, and the flute is singing a harmonic series of the C. And I was trying to come up with something that was like something that's super simple and super beautiful, that could be in the middle of all this kind of noisy music, and yet. And kind of blossom into this like beautiful texture that you didn't expect in being where it came from.
When you were creating that particular work, I mean, did you have Terry Riley in mind at all? I was sort of thought of that as I was listening to it.
I mean, Terry Riley is one of the great American composers alive, and I keep saying that right now, but you're bringing up some of my favorite music, so yeah, and American minimalism is hugely influential on me. Riley, I'm going to put Morton Feldman in that group. I mean, I feel like a lot of Wet Ink Ensemble's music is like Morton Feldman, but loud.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of similar ideas about formal structure and how things progress over time, and then how things are referenced over large scale come from Feldman. And then when we get to On Off, which is a couple movements later, which is the hocket between the three ensemble players and the electronic drum beat. That is, to me, it's Philip Glass ensemble, music in 12 parts, but using percussion instead of arpeggios.
Yeah.
It's dealing with that level of minimalism and reduction to be expressive. And I was thinking, well, how can I be expressive like that music is, but not make that music? Because I don't want to just repeat what Philip Glass did. So I came up with that solution there. And just to say, between the flute and voice and that movement on off, there's probably the gnarliest, noisiest music, which is two sections where there's just multiple things going on at once. So there's the saxophone with piano and percussion. Basically right there, all of a sudden there's three pieces of music going on at the same time. So we've still got the flute and voice with Kate and Aaron. Alex and I are improvising on top with saxophone and electronics, and then piano and percussion are playing a notated score. So there's two notated scores and one non-notated piece being played at the same time. But since the material is so different, hopefully all three of those things kind of come across. It's the Ivesian kind of idea where there's like three totally different pieces of music playing at the same time, and hopefully you can follow all three. In Cycle, the next movement, it's a one-page score where there is a center to the music, a cycle that is looping. The ensemble is looping, and people are adding their own ideas on top of it. So there's this like central rhythm, and then people are adding noisy elements, and that's a moment for me to improvise and to be the soloist. So I'm the soloist on top of that, kind of playing these soloistic music that is based around the percussion sound that is about to come in on off.
I was going to say those two movements are sort of contrasting in a way, the sort of cycle, more rounded approach, and then you have the binary-ism, for lack of a better word, of on-off. I find those two next to each other a really interesting contrast.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's the idea, is that the music reaches a kind of climax of chaos, and then it goes to what's the total opposite thing, which is this like stark minimalism that is in a tight grid that where the players, and I've talked up to this point about all this improvisation and there's freedom, and on off there's absolutely no freedom. It's this music that actually has to be played perfectly, otherwise it sounds wrong. And even like a microsecond of mistake, you can hear it immediately. So, but luckily I'm able to write for these amazing players. So that's for Ian Antonio percussion, Josh Modney violin, Aaron Lesser flute, and they can be these machines when they need to be, and it's wonderful to be able to take advantage of that as well as their ability to improvise.
Talk about Canyon. I mean, that seems to stick out. Just looking at the whole list, you think, you have these titles like Voice and Electronics, Flute and Voice, and then Canyon. What is that about?
Yeah, so the idea in the piece, if you're going to experience it from left to right over time, is that the music has been moving very quickly throughout the first couple movements, and then it hits on off, which is a 7-minute hocket, right? And the music just kind of stops. And Canyon is almost like the music entering this like psychedelic state. So if on off is this like launching pad into another state of consciousness. And so the repetition of on off hopefully gets you into a little trance, and then in Canyon you can be in that trance state. And the idea here is that it is also an electronic solo in a way, because it's the only part in the piece, well, except for on off, where the electronics are fixed. It's just a tape part that is playing back. And the ensemble is interjecting on top of it with these like little solos and little sounds that they make. But mostly it's an electronic tape part, and it's a solo for the electronics. And for years I came from kind of electronic tape music where you make this fixed piece and then you play it back. But I kind of hadn't done that for a while, and I've started to do it again recently and kind of added into these ensemble pieces. And this is a point where the tape part can kind of be the soloist and the ensemble are the accompaniment. And then out of that comes a percussion solo, fully notated percussion solo for Ian Antonio. Ian can do this. He can play this like super precise, fast music that I love. He says that one of his favorite things to do is just like play 16th notes as fast as possible. So that's kind of what I've given him here, is this like super fast notated solo that kind of takes us to the end of the piece. And at the same time, Josh Modney is improvising violin on the top. So I wonder if I didn't say that, if somebody would know like which part was written, which part wasn't. But it is a written percussion part and an improvised violin part to end the piece.
It's interesting, this whole idea of improvisation and how important an element it is of your work on this album.
Yeah.
I mean, when people from other musical genres go and record an album, there's a lot of improvisation, and they create a lot of the music as they're recording it. Not heard so much in the world of classical music, concert hall music. But when you do this in live performance, then does it change the dynamic of everything? Have you performed this entire piece in public?
Yeah, we've performed it a number of times, and there's a couple elements there that are really special. One thing is it doesn't change the dynamic. So the piece really is the piece, and it comes out as the thing that I wrote really each time we play it. But there is a freedom to it that does allow some difference. So the voice and electronics duo is going to be different every time, but because of how it's situated in the rest of the music, it will play the same function every time, and that will inform us as to how to play. But there's a couple other things that make it. This is a 40-minute piece. It's not a small piece of music, but we're not often in a situation where we can play a 40-minute piece. So sometimes we can play a 15-minute piece, sometimes a 25-minute piece, sometimes a 10-minute piece. And because this is many movements and they're kind of interlocked but not totally set, we can perform it in full, but we can also perform it in parts. And in fact, we performed it last fall at the Huddersfield Festival in the UK, and we could only play a 15-minute piece, so I made like a 15-minute version out of the parts. And then also, Erin Lesser was unable to make the trip because she was pregnant, and Kate Soper couldn't make the trip. So we had the amazing Elise Tessier, flutist and vocalist who generally plays with International Contemporary Ensemble with us, and Elise was able to play the flute part, but then also play the voice parts. Now, she couldn't do the flute and voice duo because that would have been a little too much. But we ended up doing a version where it was a flute and saxophone duo. So I did the same music, but with saxophone. So there's a certain amount of freedom in the music that allows us to mold the piece for different performance opportunities, which actually gives it more of a life than otherwise. Yeah.
Sam Pluta's Lines on Black, making up part of this recording. The other part is a piece called Glossolalia. Is that how you say it?
That's correct.
Okay, by Alex Minchek, who is a sax player for the Wet Ink Ensemble. Sam working in electronics. You're also a pianist, right? Don't you play the piano?
No, I really can. I studied voice in undergrad.
Okay,
and I'm an awful pianist. Yeah.
Well, you're still a pianist, just an awful one. we won't make you play for us.
Yeah, thank you.
The album is out on Carrier Records. It's just come out. We'll link to that from our website. And Sam, best of luck with everything that's going on. And thank you so much for spending time, and thanks for sharing your music. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me.